They are not quite private, but they're not quite public places either. The alleyways of Montreal are where families gathered and children played. There aren't as many of them as there used to be. Joyce Pillarella is a Montrealer who's putting together an oral history of Ville Emard and its alleyways before the alleys and the memories disappear. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Mitsumi.
So you decided to do an oral history of Ville Emard. I mean, obviously you grew up in Ville Emard. Special place for you.
Yeah, I did. No, because I was interested in finding about the history of the Italians in Ville Emard, and it didn't figure in the historiography of Montreal, because when you're trying to get to the history of a working class community, it doesn't really exist in traditional sources. So the only way to get at it is by interviewing hundreds of people and then using an oral history methodology to put it together.
And you talk a lot about the alleys too, you know, and it's funny because the alleys that you describe are such friendly places, and yet nowadays when you live in a big city you think of alleys as dangerous places, places that you avoid. But these are completely different kinds of alleys, right? I mean, we're looking at some of the photos that you sent over.
Well, this particular picture is interesting.
Well, this is an old one.
Okay, this is an old picture, because with this, the one thing that's interesting about alleys is that people sort of define what the alley is going to be. So some alleys tend to be a little more agricultural, because you have Italians in Ville Emard that have planted gardens all over in their backyards, and so the alleys tend to look a little more agricultural. The kids also define the use of the alleys as well, because there's a sense of possession and discovery when you go through through a lane in the city, and you find all different things, and so kids get very territorial about spaces and alleyways in cities.
The thing that's really funny too about alleys is there's a different way of getting to know your neighbors. It's one thing to live across the street from somebody, like the street is different, but when you live across an alley from somebody, there's a certain intimacy there, isn't there? Sort of a backstage quality?
Absolutely, and I think it starts with the clotheslines, because you think about it, your intimate clothes are hung on a clothesline. You're going to see older people that are going to go out in their like canotieras, their undershirts in the back. They would never do that in the front, but in the back they'll be out in their house coats, the women, and the slippers. They'll wear their undergarments outside. There's a certain intimacy that happens there, and I think a lot has to do with the human scale of alleys, because homes are very close, and so that it sort of encourages new social relationships to happen in the lane that won't happen in the front, because there's a little more formality to the front, whereas the back, it's totally informal. It's complete randomness, and you see that in the architecture, you see that in the artifacts that are left behind, the sheds. You find electrical pylons that are probably from the 20s, those beautiful steel construction pylons that are there. You find all kinds of stuff.
Because they're just kind of there and people just kind of leave them there, right?
Yeah, it's just, that's it. But then it's funny, because that encourages that kind of random play as well. So you start exploring in lanes, and then it's a way of discovering the past as well, because cities modernize their cities and people renovate their homes. The back alleys are just sort of, whatever, leave it there behind. I mean, the downside is, people discard garbage and things like that in the lanes, but it's also places of finding things from the past.
And it's a source of pride too, as people start to clean them up and take ownership of them again, because they've been so neglected over the years. Well, you're compiling an oral history, and you're inviting anybody with photographs, memories, and you can reach Joyce. It is joyce@tntdesign.com.
That's right.
Be very anxious to see how it all turns out.
Great. Thank you so much, Mitsumi.
Thanks so much for coming in today.
Oh, it was fun.